Well, hi, Johnny. Thanks so much for taking some time to meet with me today.
Welcome. Yeah, it's good to be here.
Nice. So I know we've been working together for a little while. My name's Morgan. For those who don't know, I work here at Infegy for the social listening and consumer intelligence team here. I'm the client success lead that works with Johnny and the rest of the Mintel team. So Johnny, could you tell us a little bit about you and your role at Mintel?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been at Mintel for 15 years now, and I've probably been using Infegy for the past year, I would say. And my role is as an analyst for the global food and drink industry. So what I do is I write content based on consumer insights, and I talk to a lot of clients about what the big trends are that are coming up in their sector.
Yeah. So maybe at a high level, how does Infegy's resources, the tool, how does that kind of play into that at a high level? And then maybe we can go into some of the more detailed projects that we've worked on together as well.
Sure. Well, I think in terms of high level, Infegy is very helpful in terms of really kind of deep diving into what the consumers are thinking, what they're actually saying. And we rely as a company a lot on consumer research where consumers will say they're doing something, but it's not always completely accurate or completely true. So we really appreciate the ability to look at social posts and people are actually, saying it how it is. So it gives us a nice kind of combination to sense check our own consumer data, but also what it does is it gives us some of the detail in terms of the qualitative aspects. So we can really dig into the why of a particular trend or how a trend is playing out more so than we would be able to do just from quantitative surveys.
Yeah, so a little bit more of that authenticity from the actual users or consumers. Nice.
Exactly.
So in your 15 years, how have you seen kind of the social landscape change as it relates to these trends and the consumer intake and stuff? And how has Infegy been a part of what you see in society?
Yeah, so social media's had a dramatic impact on the industries that I look at. I think one of the things that it's really done is it's accelerated trends and it's kind of
Mm-hmm.
fragmented them as well.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really, really important as a research agency that we're able to keep up with that and we're able to keep on top of it because it's much more fluid than it used to be, I think 10 to 20 years ago, or even 5 years ago.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thanks for sharing. So now maybe we can chat about a couple of the projects that you and I have worked together on. The first one being the competitor analysis piece. I think you were mentioning some coffee trends that you were looking into. So could you share a little bit about that project? Don't give away any of your secrets and kind of how Infegy has played a part in that research as well.
Yeah, so I've worked with you, Morgan, and I found that very, very helpful in terms of really looking at what consumers are saying about brands within the coffee space. And I'm really interested in this because Mintel doesn't have a lot of data on brands or what
Mm,
people think of brands.
mm,
So that kind of data and the richness of the data that we can get from Infegy is very, very valuable to us and also to our clients as well. I mean, clients want to know what consumers are saying about them on social media. So, I guess the most recent use case, as you referred to, was looking at the coffee industry. And what I wanted to do is look at some of the major brands of coffee in Europe. I wanted to kind of focus in on a particular region. I work I work globally, but I look a lot at Europe because I'm based in London.
mm,
And so what I've done is effectively built out searches for each of the coffee brands, which look not at what the brands are saying or posting, but really what individuals are posting about those brands. And what I like about Infegy is the ability to really compare the data of what people are saying
mhm.
across 6 different brands at one time, a visually very easy interface.
Mhm. What are some of those kind of key things that you're focusing on within that competitive set? You're right that you can see up to 6 brands in one workspace. So what are those kind of key comparators that you're looking at?
Yeah, that's a great question. So basically, the things I find particularly useful when I'm looking at brands are to look at sentiment.
Hmm.
So what I like about Infegy is the way that it consistently measures, looks at posts and measures what is the emotion within each post, and then it effectively gives scores. So it'll look at the joy versus trust versus love. Now, those are the great metrics to measure a brand. They're really kind of rich, and give a really nice insight. And when you see emotions like disgust, you know that a brand's got a real problem. When you see trust and joy, you know the brand's really hitting the right notes.
Hmm.
And it's the ability to compare the different brands across those different emotions, and to do it not just in a kind of one-off snapshot, but actually to do it over time.
Yeah.
And that's very, very valuable.
Yeah, when you do your searches over time, how far back are you typically looking at that historical data to kind of do that trend research?
Yeah, so I think it's quite useful to, at the moment, look about 5 years back.
Hmm.
So normally probably look about 3 years, but because of COVID-19, that kind of messed everything up. So it's quite interesting to look at what were the trends before COVID and what are the trends now.
Hmm.
So what I also have done and I found quite useful is to not just look by year, but actually to look within 6 month increments.
Mm.
And often the sample size for major brands is big enough to do that.
Hmm.
And again, it's that's great because it provides a more granular analysis, really, of the sort of emotions that those brands are listing.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, that's great. I know one of the things that we've talked about in the past is the channels and the sources that we have
Mm.
access to, or that you have access to through Infegy. So, what are some of those key ones that have been really helpful for you?
Yeah, so in terms of channels, food and drink is a very visual subject matter, and increasingly since the rise of TikTok, it's particularly with the younger consumers, it's all about the short form videos,
Mhm.
and it's all about some of the visuals as well on Instagram. So those are the channels I find particularly interesting. They're the channels that really get at some of the significant trends that are emerging.
Mhm. Yeah, so that Instagram, TikTok data is really important for you all.
Yeah, it's really important, and those are the two channels that I tend to zero in on the most. But I like the way you can look at you can break down the usage of different channels for different brands. So some
Mm.
brands, for example, in coffee, much more prominent on Twitter. There's much more conversation there. Other brands are doing better in Instagram, and that's quite useful as well to compare.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. Anything else about that kind of coffee research, the competitive analysis that you think is important to share?
Yeah, so I talked at the beginning of the call about some of the qualitative aspects that you get from
Mhm.
Infgy, and I found some really interesting little gems about coffee when I was looking into it. I found, for example, that one of the rising topics that people are talking about with coffee is sleep for one of the
Mm.
brands. I won't mention which one. And I assumed that people were talking about how they felt sleepy, so they were drinking coffee. But when I actually read the posts, people were talking about the fact that they like to drink that brand before they went to bed,
Mm.
which is a really, really interesting finding because it's quite
Yeah.
counterintuitive. And it was a lot about comfort. Now, I would have never really come across an insight like that without having the qualitative ability of Infegy. So, that's a really nice insight that I can go back and give to that client, or I can put into content, because potentially that gives them a marketing opportunity that they probably haven't thought about or explored.
Yeah, absolutely. And how quick and easy is it to get to some of that information where you can kind of drill into, okay, what is the actual conversation around this sleep piece?
Yeah, it's really quick. So a tool that I'm using, or a feature of Infegy that I'm using more and more, is the linguistics page. And I
Mhm.
love the way you can look at rising and falling topics. And so very quickly that can give you some really nice content. So, you know, if sleep is rising, all I have to
Yeah.
do is then click on the sleep words in the word cloud, and then it immediately brings up some posts that I can then go through. So it's actually very quick to find those insights.
Thank you. Yeah. Anything else about the kind of coffee conversation?
I think the other things about the coffee conversation would be the demographics. Demographics is really helpful again. So, you know, what demographics for each different brand are talking the
Mhm.
most? So, are brands, you know, appealing to the right target audience, or are they perhaps skewing older or younger than they would like? And I also really like the geography aspect. So I talked about how my role is a global role,
Yeah.
and it's really interesting to compare different countries. And so, for example, when I looked at coffee within Europe, I'm able to look at for each country visually. There's a map which will show me which country are posting most about which brand, and you can then compare the major coffee brands and see where they're doing strongly, where they're doing less strongly. And if I wasn't doing this for Europe, if I was doing it globally, then I'd be able to do that on a global map, and that's very powerful.
Hmm. Yeah. Thank you. All right. Do you want to kind of shift over into the second project that we've
Yeah.
spent some time on together for the audience segments, specifically the tentative tasters, flavor
Mhm.
seekers, risk averse, and dining explorers? Can you share with us a little bit about kind of your thought process behind building those audience segments, what kind of went into that, how it was helpful, and then what you do from here?
Yes, absolutely. So we produce consumer reports, and sometimes within those reports we will segment audiences based on how they respond to the survey attitudinally. So we'll create these groups like flavor seekers, for example. So what I was interested in doing with Infegy is then we've looked at those groups in the report. In terms of just a snapshot. But what I was interested in doing with Infegy is then taking those groups and recreating them in social media. So I know that you can get information from people's bios, for example. That you know, it means that you can get quite close to the different segment groups. And then what I found really interesting is then to really track those different groups and look at how their interests and their tastes are evolving in terms of some of the posts that they're producing. And was there any issues perhaps that we didn't cover in the report about those particular segment groups that would be interesting to clients?
Yeah, and I know you and I worked together to kind of build those out. So, could you speak a little bit to kind of how we created that? I know you mentioned the bio piece, but kind of how we went about generating these different groups.
Yeah, absolutely. So it was a really good collaboration. And what I valued is the fact that you were able to bring your expertise of the tool and also of social media generally and how people write and talk on social media. And then I was able to bring in my expertise in terms of the content and in terms of reading the report, which creates these segment groups. So I think it really worked well to have a combination and to really kind of brainstorm what are the sort of keywords that people would be asking, and to really build them out iteratively between us.
Absolutely. And then once we have those groups created, I know we've talked about using kind of the content subject filters for identifying specific areas of like desserts and baking, even, or
Yes.
alcoholic beverages. Could you speak a little more to how those have been helpful?
Yeah, definitely. So content subjects are really helpful because sometimes if you look too broadly, you won't really find as interesting information as you'd like. So for me, it was really helpful because there are certain categories within food and drink that tend to be quite fast moving and tend to set the trends for the rest of the industry. So you talked about desserts and there's bakery, there's also alcoholic beverages as well and cocktails. So the content subject allows you to just with one click of a button kind of go through and find the specific subject that you want. Another good example is I think there's a vegan content subject as well, and that's a really interesting trend. So that's been really helpful to follow that. So yeah, I find it very easy that rather than kind of creating this content subject from scratch, you can just filter it within a few seconds, and then that really makes your run more specific and more valuable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, that's great. Anything else that's kind of stood out to you or been quite impactful as far as the audience segments that we built, and then kind of what you're doing now with those groups?
Yeah, so I think what we're trying to do with those groups is really understand a bit more about the trends that are maybe quite small at the moment, the early signals, if you like, that could become big trends. So it might be people talking about a particular flavor or a particular recipe or a particular influencer, and it's those early signals that we're very interested in, because we're very good at understanding what's happening in the market, but what we really want to do is understand where the market's going to be going. That's the most valuable thing to food and drink clients, so they can plan accordingly. And some of these trends aren't really trends, they're just fads, and other ones develop into trends. So for us, it's been really helpful in terms of looking at those segment groups and really trying to nail down, what are the emerging areas that brands need to pay attention to.
I love learning about how clients are actually using the tool and kind of putting it into practice with your day-to-day and your research on your side. So anything else that might be interesting to share as far as kind of how you're pairing Infegy's data and insights with what you're doing at Mintel otherwise?
Yeah, so what I'd also like to talk about is the way I've started to use it to quantify trends. So at Mintel, we have a trends team, and they have identified drivers that are the drivers of consumer behavior. So it could be things like health or value or customization. And it's really helpful for us to track how those trends are emerging, not just in food and drink, but in other CPG industries. And Infegy allows us to kind of build out groups of consumers to really see how big the conversation is for each of those drivers, and really to compare those drivers with each other. And we can look, month by month. We can look year by year. So it's really interesting to look at the trends of how those consumer drivers are developing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, cool. All right. Well, what's been kind of like a wow moment or something that you've been really impressed with in the tool that kind of just made your life easier?
Yeah, so I think the biggest wow for me, it's not a particular moment necessarily, but it's a feature of the tool. And I've talked about it a bit already, but it's the rising and falling topics, because that's just a very quick way to identify, what are people talking about less and is not that interesting, and what are the trends that are really starting to gain traction, and then the way that you can very easily dig down into those words that catch your attention.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And what's kind of, I'm guessing it changes for different searches, but what's the time frame that you're typically looking at those rising and falling topics?
Yeah, so I think ideally, and it would depend on sample size, but probably ideally looking about 3 to 6 months.
Mhm.
Sometimes it might be a year, but I think the power of the tool is that you can really look as recently as possible, and that makes it very, very up to date.
All right. Well, anything else you want to share with us about Infegy and your experience?
No, I guess the only thing I would want to share is that I found Infogee to be, incredibly collaborative and helpful, and that's great for us because I think I think we get to better truths if we combine our own industry knowledge with Infogee's skills, and not all partners work as closely as Infogee does, and for us that's extremely valuable.
Glad to hear it. It's a pleasure on our side as well. I've definitely enjoyed working with you and the rest of the Mintel team. So thank you so much for your time and for sharing all of those great insights and giving us a peek into the Mintel work that you're doing.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks for inviting me.
Thanks, Johnny. Have a great rest of your day.
You too.
Bye.